Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. What's the creepiest or most unsettling thing a child has ever said to you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. My daughter 4 was playing in the backyard one day, and I quickly went inside to do something in the kitchen on our first floor. I did not go upstairs to the bedrooms at all. After a minute or so, I came back out. She said, "Mommy, why were you in my room? I saw you look out the window at me." This freaked me out because we were the only people home at the time. I said I didn't go upstairs, and she insisted she saw me look out her window. With great hesitation, I went upstairs to look around, but nobody was in my house, lol. Ghost or otherwise. When my daughter was about 3 or 4, she started talking about the blue lady. My wife and I asked her who she was, and she told me, "I don't know, but she wants her hands back." Chills. This went on for a few weeks. The story never changed, and it was always the blue lady needs her hands. We were seconds away from getting a priest or witch to bless the house. One morning, I'm watching TV and there's a woman in a blue US post office uniform saying, "Thanks to blah blah hand cream, I got my hands back." And my daughter comes running into the room screaming, "That's the blue lady, I love her." I relaxed so hard I nearly shit myself. When we moved into this big house, we all started hearing things and seeing shadows in the top of the stairs. The noise I heard was a loud banging on my bedroom door. Think police banging rather than knocking, but everyone was fast asleep. My youngest son was 3.5 to 4 at the time. He said someone sat in his room and he saw it crawl toward him. He drew pictures of it. It was black with no discernible face. He said it always crawled into his room and watched him. This all went on for 6 months before it calmed down. He just turned 7. He's a normal kid, but has remained scared of being by himself in his room. A few greatest hits. When my son was about 2 or 3, for a few days in a row, he told me that there was someone in his room with no eyes, just ears, the night before. For a while, around age 3, that same son got confused about the meaning of dead and would use it to mean inanimate. So a stuffed animal cat would be a dead cat, and a doll would be a dead kid, etc. Now, at 4 years old, when he's having a tantrum about something mundane, like he doesn't want to go to bed or doesn't want to get dressed, he'll threaten to make himself not alive anymore. Meanwhile, when my daughter was around 5 years old, she discovered the concept of wills and inheritance, probably from the Aristocrats movie, if I recall, and went through a phase of asking if various items of mine, usually sparkly stuff like jewelry, would be hers one day after I had died. Fun times. I mentioned this just the other day. My bedroom is really dark during the night. Woke up to my daughter right in front of my face whispering, "Mommy." All I could see was just this big shadow when I woke up. Scared the shit out of me. My sons have done it too, just not as close to my face. She's also snuck into our room in the middle of the night and grabbed my foot to wake me up. Childhood fear was realized, except it was my own little monster instead of one that lives under the bed. I've also caught one of my sons smooshing his bits between the toilet seat and bowl. He was taking forever in the bathroom, so I got up to check on him and saw him doing that. I think he was 5 at the time. This has happened to me for sure. One of my children would just be right next to you in the middle of the night and be like, "Daddy." It's creepy. My son was almost 3 years old when he called me to his room about 5 minutes after he was put to bed. I asked him what's wrong and he replied, "I'm scared." I asked him, "What are you afraid of?" "I'm scared of the old lady with the angry red eyes." I figured he saw something on the telly or his iPad, so I bent over his bed in the corner, asked him where he'd seen this old lady with the angry red eyes. "She's standing right behind you." Damn, that was chilling. Worst of all, I turned around slowly, looked around and said, "There's nobody here, everything's okay." Kissed him goodnight and left him, but left the door halfway open. Still feel bad about it, but wasn't going to let some angry old red-eyed ghost bitch F with my family. My partner's nephew was really into commercial jingles when he was about 4. Grandma was babysitting one night, and after she had put the kid to bed, she fell asleep on the couch in the living room. Now, this was one of those wraparound couches with a high back, so someone who is the height of a 4-year-old can't really be seen coming down the hallway by someone laying on the couch. Well, around 1 a.m., Grandma is woken up by a small child's voice slowly singing, "Nationwide is on your side," from somewhere in the dark behind her. Scared her silly. Thanks, Brad Paisley. This happened last week. My 2-year-old is sitting down at the table for dinner. It's dark outside. He looks outside and says, "What is that?" He doesn't know how to say who yet. When meeting new people, he says, "What is that?" My wife and I look outside and don't see anything. It's dark. We look back at him. He's staring into the darkness. He's a kid. His eyes are new. He sees better than us. We freak out. Is there someone outside in a dark outfit and we can't make it out? And he can? I grab a flashlight, go outside looking for trespassers. Nothing. Come back in. He makes the same comment. I sit next to him and look in the direction he is. Like over 200 feet away, in another house, there's a small LED American flag that is turned on. It's barely a foot wide. Is that what you're looking at, red and blue? Yeah, that's a flag, buddy. My sister's imaginary friend told her that a burglar was in our house when we came home from a shopping trip one day. We all laughed and humored her. We get home and start unloading the trunk, and a man runs out of the house in the back. My mom asked my sister when her friend had told her, and she said that he'd come all the way to the grocery store and told her, and that the peanut brittle she got was for him. My sister didn't eat peanut brittle before or since. His name was also Joshua. This is not the only thing Joshua and my sister did. We didn't encourage it, but we also didn't argue with her. Our dog broke out of a window and got hit by a car miles away from home. My sister, who hated the dog, woke up the next morning and took my dad straight to where he was sitting in the passenger seat and pointing down streets. He lived another 5 years. Joshua had told her where he was and that his eye was hurt. He was stunned and had a broken paw. The impact had also knocked his eye out of his head. My sister will still speak about Joshua as if he was a person we all knew from our childhood.
That is absolutely wild. Hopefully Joshua, maybe he was like a watchful protector or something. Should explore that.
When I was 7 months pregnant with my third kid, we put our 2 kids in the van along with everything we could fit and drove from the East Coast to the West Coast to start a new job. The kids were 1 and 3. We stopped fairly often for pee breaks for me and to let the kids run around. On the 3rd day, they were especially worked up, so we stopped at a park somewhere in New Mexico or Arizona or that area. We sat down and let them play on the playground, and we had a little picnic. The 3-year-old was having a blast, but I noticed he kept talking to himself, laughing at his own jokes and being generally weird. When he came over to eat, I asked him what was up, and he said he was playing with Tony. I asked who Tony was, and he said it was his new friend. Then he started laughing because Tony was next to him, telling him something silly. It wasn't the first imaginary friend he had had, but for some reason, this one was creeping me out a little. But I just told him to eat up and could play a bit more before we left. When it was time to go, he was more upset than usual, telling me that Tony didn't want him to go. Tony wanted him to stay with him. Tony said he could stay forever. I was honest to God just shivering at this point because I was dealing with pregnancy hormones, and for whatever reason, this was just freaking me out. So I picked him up and carried him screaming to the car. My husband had taken our 18-month-old and we got them both in their seats. I realized I had left my purse behind, so I went to get it. Hand on my heart, the next part is true, though I understand if you think I'm lying or karma farming. I should probably Google to find where this park was, but it was 8 or 9 years ago and I don't remember. As I turned around to head back to the car, I saw a plaque next to the entrance to the park right under the sign. It was a memorial dedication to a 7-year-old boy who had been killed when he had been hit by a car while biking home from the park in the 1980s. His name was Anthony. We got in the car and left as fast as possible, and we only stopped at McDonald's play places for the rest of our trip. My son barged into my room at 3 a.m. yelling at the dogs, saying they puked and shit all over the rooms in my mom's office. Half awake, I shot out of bed and rushed to find everything as it should be. I thought maybe he had a bad dream and was in half-awake state too. He started ranting about how they must have eaten it and cleaned it up. By the time I was wide awake but not clear on what the F was going on, then the weird shit kicked into high gear. He started whispering and telling me to be quiet because his cousin was hiding in this closet listening to our conversation. I effing freak out, thinking my son has lost his effing mind and had a serious mental breakdown and separation from reality. Turns out the little effer intentionally took 10 Dramamine because he read online it will make you hallucinate. Turns out it does. But not happy dancing forest elves like mushrooms or acid, but shit-eating dogs and noisy laundry monster cousins hiding in your closet at 3 a.m. hallucinations. As a teacher, I've seen an 8th grader laughing with his friends at the top of the stairs as he drops a metal water bottle onto a kindergartner. It hit the kid. A hematoma formed. He went to the ER. The parents of the bully's child wrote it off as his ADHD. F no. He has no medical plan with the school. They never informed anyone of that lie. They said it happens and moved on. Needless to say, I passed all the information to our administrative staff, co-teacher, and special ed teacher. The parents were negligent in informing us of medical issues. Admins decided to bar him from class until a doctor's note and medical plan was discussed. Meanwhile, a kindergartner is in the hospital, and the parents have all the information to press charges thanks to me. Long story short, Bully didn't have ADHD. Parents transferred him to avoid consequences. Principal and admins could do nothing to add to the issue to his paper trail. Parents refused to inform staff of the next school he was attending. Kindergartner's family were encouraged to press charges. They did, but it was settled privately. Upsets me still. F that bully. When she was 3, we had gone for a meal at a really old pub or restaurant. She wanted the toilet, so I took her, and the pub had this kind where it's like a little room on its own. Now, she was in that phase where they're all basically small terrorists, and if you do or say the wrong thing, well, there will be the most almighty tantrum. Her big thing was no talking while she was on the toilet. 3 years old or weird. So I'm standing there silently looking out of this really tiny barred window while she does her business. It's a tiny Tudor window, and the first thought that popped into my head was that it would be impossible to get out of it if the place were on fire. Don't know why, but that's just my brain. Suddenly I hear her little voice say, "It's okay, Mommy, there won't be a fire." Now, I know 100% I didn't say anything out loud. She had me well trained, but somehow she heard my thoughts. She did it again a couple of times in the next few months, and then has never done it again. It was so bloody weird.
Mind reading children? Totally common, not scary at all. Stay out of cornfields.
One day when my son was about 3, he started asking all kinds of interesting questions about his younger sister. He was providing details about the way she dressed and her personality. I kept trying to ask if he meant her cousins or a friend from school, maybe a character on his favorite TV show. But this only made him more upset. By the time my wife came in the room, he was nearly stamping his feet, asking these questions I couldn't answer. After my wife tried to calm him down and assure him that they were no little sister, he got even more upset and screamed, "Then why does she look just like you?" This caused my wife to run out of the room crying and slam the door to the bedroom behind her. Just over a year earlier, my wife had had a miscarriage about 9 weeks in. It's an emotional event she still hasn't completely recovered from to this day. And to this day, I still have no idea to whom he was referring. The good news is that this sort of talk ended that day and was never spoke of again. He now has a real little sister. It was a spine-tingly, creepy conversation I'll never forget. Oh, I've got a good one. So my son was probably about 4 or 5. I wake him up every morning. I go in one morning and he's already awake in bed, his eyes wide open and blanket pulled up to his chin. He's completely still and just staring at the corner of his room. I look at him, look at the corner, wait a couple seconds, and asked him what was wrong. Still looking at the corner, he says, "Somebody crawled on the floor and up the wall and looked around." When he looked at me, his head did this. He pointed his finger in the air and just started spinning in a circle very fast. I put my hand on the back of his head and said, "Let's go get breakfast and watch some cartoons." He looked very freaked out, and I wanted to get his mind off of it. As he's walking down the hall in front of me, he sort of half whispers out loud, "He just faded away." I didn't let him know it, but I was freaking out inside. He's 8 years old now, and I asked him if he remembers it. He said he does, and that he saw it another time backwards, crawling on a ceiling before just fading away again. Freaky. My youngest daughter was about 4. We're sitting on the couch watching PBS Kids. She reached over and paused the TV, then she looks at me and affectionately says, "Mommy, when you turn into a zombie, I will have to lock you in a room and keep you there. I promise to feed you brains every day, but you can't have my brains." I ask her how she plans to get brains to feed zombie mommy, and she says, "Well, I will have to kill a lot of people, but I'm sure I'll get used to it." There was much conversation after that. What stayed with me was not if I became a zombie, but when. She was very sure I would. When I asked her about where her dad and sister were, she said they would be dead, likely the first people she fed to me, but I wouldn't know it because all I cared about were brains. I wondered for a long while how my 4-year-old landed on the thoughts of zombies and murder. My oldest finally filled her in that the last time my dad had babysat, he fell asleep on them. So youngest started scrolling through channels until she found some zombie movie. When my daughter was young, we'd be riding in the car and she'd randomly say, "My sisters are here," then animatedly whisper to the empty seat beside her. She was very light-hearted about the whole thing. She spoke of Ira and other sisters that she didn't know their names. She was always happy to see them, Being an only child, imaginary friends weren't a concern to me. What was worrisome was it only happened near cemeteries. It was one of those creepy things that you'd try to explain away. She'd say it, and I'd look around relieved to see no headstones in sight, only to find a small family plot buried in the brush along the roadside just a few moments later. Once it happened on vacation, she said it at the base of a hill. As we crested the hill, there was a cemetery on the other side. I have no clue why, and she never mentioned the cemeteries or even acknowledged them. It happened frequently, and I would just shrug it off. Eventually, she got older. It stopped. She's a teen now. Says when she thinks of it, it's like a dark room full of different girls with the light only shining on the girl she knew as Ira in the forefront. I googled the girl named Ira. It means watchful in Hebrew.